Police and Crime Commissioner. And welcome to the Commissioner's team, also to the members of the public that are in this meeting today and members of the press. So we'll start with item 1 on the agenda. Can we have apologies for absence, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. We have apologies from Councillor Phil Wilkes, Councillor Sarah Chotter and Councillor Emma Daly.
Thank you very much. Are there any declarations of interest this morning? No, I don't see that. So item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of November. Can I have a proposer, Councillor Skinner, and a seconder, Councillor Beale? Thank you very much. Item 4, actions on that from that meeting. Have those actions been completed, please?
Yeah, there was one action more complete.
Okay. Item 5, communications from myself. I have nothing this morning for this meeting. Do we have at item 6 any questions from the public, please?
No questions from the public received.
No questions from the public. So we move quickly to what is the most important item on the agenda this morning, the proposed policing precept. So I'll pass over to you, Commissioner, in the first instance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. We can mark the passage of time by this particular meeting. I think this, it's something that comes around all too quickly for us, but I think we find ourselves in not just the difficult circumstances that we usually do with our finances in Lincolnshire when compared to other force areas, but in quite dire straits this particular time round. So I'm sure everybody has read the report and is very aware of what's going on. But I would propose, as we normally do, to hand over to my Chief Financial Officer, Julie Flint, so she can go through slides with you all just to give you some background information before we take any questions.
Thank you. Over to you then, Julie. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, so 5 main areas I'd like to talk you through, just to point out the key aspects of the report. First of all, talk about the police grant settlement. So that's the money that we get from central government to support policing in Lincolnshire. Let's talk generally about the expenditure plans I'm looking about, and also the overall funding plans. Then looking ahead at what public spending might be looking like into the medium term. Talk about how we manage risk and then the impact on the precepts. Now, normally at this point, I talk about the provisional grant settlement and then the fact that we've had confirmation that the provisional settlement has been confirmed. And for the first time in my experience this year, there was a change between the provisional grant settlement and the settlement that was announced at the end of last week. It's just a small change, but it's noteworthy. So first of all, Lincolnshire gets its share of the overall grant that's available for policing in England and Wales is less than 1%. So it's 0.83 of 8%. We get 78.7 million of the 9.5 billion that's available for policing overall. Our funding from government grant, all of the funding, we got 5.6 million, and that's because there are some other aspects as well as the core grant. And that's actually increased by nearly £1 million from the provisional settlement because the government has doubled the amount that it's putting into the neighbourhood policing grant overall, from 100 million to 200 million. So our share of that has doubled between the provisional settlement and the final settlement. And so that's different from the numbers that you have in the paperwork that you have in front of you, because that was only released at the end of last week. And then just the other aspects, again, of the overall settlement. There's a core police grant that's gone up by 2.8 million since last year. The ring-fenced allocation for the police uplift programme, this is the additional police officers that have been introduced into policing over the last 2 or 3 years. That's gone down slightly. So there's a smaller ring-fenced element, but there's more in the core grant. A pension top-up grant, that's gone down slightly again. That's to take account of increased employers' contributions towards pensions.
I just stop you there, Julie. My apologies. Councillor Beale, I think, would like to.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. With regards to the pension top up, so just want to understand it more, because normally they're assessed at the actuarial triennial valuations, etc. So why is there the need for an additional top up?
It's related to the actuarial valuation, and this is the police pensions, which is an unfunded. So the government makes sure that, as far as possible, the funding that goes to police and crime commissioners is sufficient to meet the increase in the employer's contributions. Because the government, as I say, it's an unfunded scheme, the government commissions the actuarial review. Pension contributions went up significantly, and so the government has put in specific elements of central government funding to cover that increase.
Is it a normal valuation, triennial valuation, which is normally when the pensions are looked at? Or was it just extra?
I think it's every 4 years for the police pension scheme. It was done 2 years ago. So this is a continuation of the pension top-up grant from last year. And I can't quite recall whether we had it the year before. But it's just routine revaluations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie. Sorry to.
No problem. So you'll be aware that employers' national insurance contributions are going up in 25/6. That's nationally. So the government introduced a new element of the national funding intended to compensate for the increase in national insurance contributions. And then the thing that I've mentioned already, the neighbourhood policing grant. This is a new introduction this year and intended to fund the current government's commitment to increase neighbourhood policing. And as I say, in the provisional settlement, we had allocated to us just over 800,000. It's doubled to almost 1.7 million following consultation. And the settlement confirmed preset flexibility of up to £14 per annum for a Band D property. Next slide, please.
Just got a couple of questions coming in. Councillor Skinner first, then Councillor Beale.
Yeah, just want to ascertain whether the national insurance contribution, the 2.2 million, actually covers the increases for us.
No, it doesn't, and we'll come on to that in a little bit, but I can deal with it now. It didn't quite cover the cost of our own employers' contribution increase for people directly employed by Lincolnshire Police. So not quite covered that. But in addition to that, we'll have increased costs because we contract out places, and those employers will have an increase in their costs, and therefore they will be putting up their charges to us, and we don't get any additional grant for that element of it.
Do we know the net effect of all that?
On the slide later on, I think we can see what the effect is for the directly employed people. Yeah.
But that change will have quite a big impact on operations, etc.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the reasons why the funding that we get, is less than the spending that we need to have.
Councillor Beale.
Thank you. Following on from that, the extra grant which has been granted to cover that is a 1-year grant, or has there been any indications that government, Leicester, will continue that going forward? In other words, next year, will you have to pick up the full increased cost of national insurance?
We haven't had a spending review nationally since 2021. So government itself is working on a year-by-year basis at the moment. So all we know about at the moment is what's going to happen in 25/6. we don't know what's going to happen beyond that, and I'm not sure that the government has got firm plans in place yet. But I think the spending review is due to report June, July this year.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Back to you, Julie. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll move on to spending, and the next slide, please. So this is just to give you an indication of the proportion of the spending, where it goes. And as you will expect, by far and away, the largest part of our spending is on police officers at just over 45%. And then again, police staff and PCSOs, nearly 28%. The vast majority on people, because policing is largely a people-led business. 23% on other costs, fleet, custody, buildings, all of that sort of thing. A large amount, 3% on capital financing, because we invest heavily in capital, particularly ICT, because of the way it supports, modern day policing, etc. And then just highlighted there a small proportion, just 3% for the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Can I just hold you? Sorry, Councillor Burt.
Sorry, Julie. You just made me think about this, given 28% of funding is PCSOs. This might be something I should ask later, but is that likely to impact on PCSO? We'll come to that later.
I think we'll probably cover that later.
Well, I thought I should.
If you come in a little bit later on. Thank you. Sorry, Julie.
So what I should say, all of this, all of the numbers that I'm presenting here are the costs of the existing level of service. That's what I should emphasise. Okay, so the next slide just gives you an indication of how the spending plans, yes, please, are over the medium term. And you can see there that if I can draw your attention to the line, 3 lines up in the table, you can see there that's how our spending is increasing over the medium term. And that's taking account of things like inflation and pay awards and all of that sort of thing. The next line is the budget gap, use of reserves and savings. And what that's indicating at the moment is there is a gap between our current level of service and the funding that we are expecting for next year and for subsequent years. And you can see that budget gap for next year is around the £14 million mark, and it rises to about 20 million by the end of the medium term. I just wanted to highlight there what some of the expenditure increases are in 25/6. So there was a pay award in September 24, last September. That cost us, that increases the budget in 25/6 by nearly £6 million. And the police grant that we've received to help fund that increase is £2.9 million. And this is coming back to the point about the employer's national insurance rate. So for our staff, we believe the cost is around £2.6 million, and the grant that we got was £2.2 million. So you can see there's a gap there. Other things that are increasing our cost next year is inflationary cost pressures on existing ICT services. There's quite a lot of inflation in that part of the market. Over time, due to operational reasons, an increase of £1 million. And then the other big item is operational equipment, tasers, drones, etc. 0.4 million. So we'll move on to funding. Again, we've got a pictorial which gives you an indication of where the money comes from. So the purple element there showing you money from central government, which is about 55%, and then locally, council tax largely about 45%. And you can see the breakdown into the different aspects of those two areas on the right-hand side. just a note there again, it excludes the additional amount of maybe piercing because these slides were prepared a little bit months. And then if we move on to the next slide, that gives you an indication of where the money, where we forecast the money will be over the medium term. The only thing I would highlight there is in 24/5, we've got the final line, reserves budget balancing. That's indicating that in the current year, we have drawn down £9.2 million from reserves in order to fund the current level of service. There isn't a corresponding number in for the future years because the budget isn't finalised yet. So we're not absolutely clear at the moment how much we will have to draw down. But bear in mind that the gap that we indicated on one of the previous slides was 14 million for next year. So that 14 million will need to be covered by a combination of reserves and savings. And I think that becomes clearer on the next slide, where it just highlights there the gap across the medium term. So 14 million next year, rising to 20 million per annum by the end of the period. So as the bullets indicate there, by the end of the period, as things stand, we will have to identify cost reductions of over £20 million on a recurrent basis, unless there is funding coming from anywhere else, because by that time our reserves will have gone. So that means £20 million worth of service reductions. We've talked before over the years about the funding formula, the way the government allocates what is available nationally down to individual areas. And, the funding formula has not been updated, I think, for about 12 plus years now. So it's still being allocated on an extremely historic basis that does not reflect updated demand, updated population, etc. And Lincolnshire, for many, many years, has been making the case to government that the funding formula needs to change in order that it funds Lincolnshire properly and in accordance with current circumstances, current demand, etc. So the final bullets there, maximum precept flexibility still requires significant reductions, because what I should have is all of these numbers assume that maximum precept flexibility is taken. Reserves are almost exhausted, and we continue to discussions with government about the funding situation. So just a very quick look then at what the government's own numbers are saying about prospects for the future. And I think this underlines the fact that we need to be successful in arguing for a greater share of the pot, because it's unlikely that the pot itself is going to increase. We can get more money from central government if the overall sum of money available increases, or on the other hand, if we can get a bigger share of it. And it seems to me the only way we're going to get extra money from government is if we get a bit better share. These numbers and the graph and so on are from the Office for Budget Responsibility. And if you look at the bars on the right-hand side, the final yellow bar and the final blue bar, the yellow bar is saying that, I should say, policing is in a category within government. So it's not the health service, it's not defence, it's in the other category. And so the final two bars there are for the other category of government spending overall. And since 23/4, the yellow bar shows that up to date, the other category has increased a little in cash terms, just over 1%. But the forecast beyond 25/6 is that other category is going to reduce in cash terms by, I think, 1.1%. Of course, if it reduces in cash terms by 1.1%, in real terms, it's much more. So our assessment is the prospects for the pot increasing are limited. So we have to be successful in securing a bigger share of the available money. That's our chance of getting it. The next slide just again underlines Lincolnshire's position. And this shows you funding per head of population. It excludes the London forces because that skews the picture. But the orange bar on the right is Lincolnshire. So we're the lowest per head of population in the country, as we have been for some considerable time. There is a system within policing of grouping together most similar forces, and His Majesty's Inspectorate group forces together so that you can do a comparison. The pink bars are the most similar forces for Lincolnshire. So you can see there that not only are we the lowest, but we are a long way the lowest compared to our most similar forces. And I think if we were funded at the same level as the next lowest to us, it would automatically mean an extra £10 million for Lincolnshire per annum. If we were funded, I think, at the highest English force, which is Cumbria, I'll leave out the Welsh forces because they're a little different. I think it's over 64 million pounds per year. Lincolnshire police would have in order to police Lincolnshire. So it's a stark difference. So if we move on to risk management then, already mentioned the police funding formula review. We don't know when it's going to happen. I mean, I think it will have to happen because it is unsustainable for the government to be allocating £10 billion of public money on a basis that, you know, is just not rational as it stands. And of course, we have inflationary impacts. There are risks into the medium term. We saw the Bank of England was saying yesterday, you know, there is a lot of uncertainty around. So we continue as ever, maintaining the focus on productivity and efficiency, you know, investing in technology and that sort of thing. Continue to try and influence the grant distribution and funding review when it resurfaces, because there've been a number of attempts in recent years to land it, but although a lot of work has been done, it's never quite got to the end. Maximise funding opportunities. We make special grant applications to government whenever we have an opportunity, and just to continue to articulate the service impact of the budget gap, which you know, has been happening certainly over the last few months. And then finally, we use reserves to mitigate risk. And if we can move on to the next slide, please. Every year we're required to produce a reserve strategy. So this strategy is from March 24, because we haven't got the March 25 one ready yet. And you can see the top line of numbers is the grand total of our reserves, and it's reducing over the period. We have sort of three sorts of reserves. And the bottom line there shows you our risk-based reserves. So they're the reserves we're required to keep to make sure that Lincolnshire Police can be a going concern. And we do a detailed risk assessment every year about the sort of risks that we're facing. And we have a range within that risk assessment. Our risk-based reserves are planned to be at the minimum of the risk assessed range. So we're not overdoing it. We're keeping the minimum we're required to keep there in order to ensure that Lincolnshire Police can be a going concern. The line above it shows you the earmark reserves that are for specific projects that extend beyond the medium term. And often these will be things where, for example, proceeds of Crime Act receipts. where we're required to spend them on a small range of initiatives. And therefore, the reserve goes up and down across the period. But there's a very specific range of things that we can spend those on. And then the line above all of that is where our budget balancing reserve sits, together with a number of other reserves, because the reserves are the way that we manage spending that starts in one period and ends in another. I'll give you an example. We're in the process of putting in a new enterprise resource planning system. The old one is 10, 12 years old, and managing that project requires a reserve over the period. So that's the sort of thing that would be in there. But you can see that those earmark reserves go down to nil over the period.
I'll just hold you there, Julie. Thank you. Councillor Skinner, thank you.
Thank you very much. I've listened very carefully to the different types of reserves. Most accountants build in contingencies within budgets. They're obviously not shown there, or are they?
No, I mean, what I would say is, yes, you know, accountants like to be prudent, but the situation that we're in Lincolnshire Police at the moment, I don't think that we're building in any sort of cushion within the budget.
And that's the point I was trying to tease out. We go well beyond. There's no flesh left. We've had years of it. And even going back to the chart on there, they don't face the challenges this force does. Being the second largest county and receiving the poorest budget, when people are looking at what we do, they're not judging correctly, are they?
No, and you know, that's why we highlighted the most similar forces, that, you know, our funding level compared with forces that are similar to us is way below that funding level.
Thank you very much.
And that's on the current basis. That's before any of these savings are taken.
Well, I just know how accountancy works from a contingency point of view. It was just the point of teasing out the answer. And that was the answer I needed. Thank you.
You're welcome. So I think the next couple of slides are around the precepts. And first of all, just a summary here. I think you've got an annex in your report pack that deals with the public consultation in detail. So a very big response this year, over 4,000 responses, and 78% of those believing that funding for Lincolnshire Police should be increased. And 65% prepared to pay at least 5% more. The next table just shows you the impact on the different council tax bands. £13.95 precept increase for a Band D property. And then just the final slide showing you what that means. So the £13.95 is equivalent to 27 pence per week increase, and it provides us with £3.8 million of additional income. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie. It's very helpful. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, are there any further questions for Julie from her presentation? Okay, well, Commissioner, been much coverage of reducing police officer numbers by 200, but clearly you can't make them redundant overnight. So what's the timeline for that? How long would that take to make 200 or to reduce by 200 officers?
Yeah, if I can say, it might be a good idea for us to tag team this with the chief. So I obviously don't want to tread on the operational toes of our expert police officer, but I mean, as you know, you're quite right, we can't make police officers redundant, and around 60 officers a year exit the organisation through sort of the normal routes of retirement or choosing to leave the service or medical retirements, etc. So it would take a period of time that's probably around 3 years to get to that point. So that's the, for want of a much better term, the sort of glide path that would naturally take. if there was no recruitment at all over that period. However, that's not a decision that's been taken yet. We're still working through all the various scenarios because there are all kinds of implications. So, for example, because the police officer uplift grant is ring fenced, as soon as we drop below the 1186 number, we start being financially penalised. So you get about £40,000 per officer from government as part of the uplift. They take from you £40,000 per officer twice a year for missing the target. So if we miss by one, we lose 80,000. That is up to the first 30 officers that you're below. Then they take the entire grant off you, which would mean we'd have to reduce by an additional 70 officers because we were being penalised for not having enough money. And you can see the perversity of the system we're working with in that case. The other element, which makes sense to articulate at this point, and I'll bring Paul in as well, is around the new neighbourhood policing guarantee, because we're in a very similar situation where perfectly reasonably the government wants a commitment to increase neighbourhood presence. We'd all like to see that, so I very much support them in that endeavour. The problem is that they're using a baseline based on how many people working in neighbourhood policing as of the 31st of March this year, this year, not taking into account the savings that we've got to make, which means it would be impossible for us to do that, which means we could be in a position of not accessing a single penny of the £1.7 million, which means, ironically, the forces that have got the money might get given our money as well, so they can over-recruit to compensate for us not being able to keep the numbers we have. So we're working with government on that to try and avoid that, but at the moment we've got no clarity. So there's lots of moving parts around it, as you can imagine. But to be specific about the police officer numbers, that's the glide path. But if I may come over, the chief.
Absolutely. Thank you. And good morning, everybody. Maybe a year since I last saw you. So I think, just to reiterate some remarks, we'll start some context first. So I've worked in 4 forces, spent most of my time in Lincolnshire. And to come back to Lincolnshire, I knew money would be an issue. But when I see how threadbare the organisation is compared just to our East Midlands compatriots where I've worked, it really is stark. There's no doubt about it. I think in terms of reductions that are required. So the 14 million projection of deficit next year has always been that. We welcome money that the government has given us in addition. As we've seen, that's actually soaked up by, increases in inflationary pressures and cost of pay and pension, etc. So at the moment, we've taken no firm decisions with regard to meeting that financial plan for next year. But what we are doing is modelling a 1,000 officer model, which is too low, but is what's required to meet the fiscal envelope. And also we're looking at obviously police staff because, as we've just discussed, police officers are a natural reduction, whereas police staff, you can, although we don't want to, you can cut more quickly and more deeply. And with the uplift and trying to balance that with the penalty of not maintaining police officer numbers, it then creates that issue of, well, where else do you find the savings? So at the moment, no decisions taken, but we are modelling and profiling in the background, and that 200 would be reduced over a period of the financial plan, which is 3 years.
Thank you, Chief Constable. Councillor Burke, you wanted to come in, and I'll bring Councillor Woodliffe in. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. This might be the right moment to mention PCSOs down here. So where in this, the review that you're carrying out, Chief Constable, Commissioner, in that review, where do PCSOs sit? And do you feel, and you must be looking at impacts on policing, impacts on the detection of crime and all those other details. I know you're a former police officer, and that's so. I'm trying to tease out there how do the PCSOs come out of that. Thanks for that.
So again, no decisions have been taken. What we are doing is modelling all the different services that we provide, those that are statutory and set in legislation, due to those that are not. Now, I'm a massive fan of PCSOs. I think they do a wonderful job. And I know that, quite rightly, the public want to see visibility in their, their communities, their parishes. And I couldn't agree more. I think that the situation that we see, and I can't specifically say about PCSOs because decisions are not taken, and we link into the neighbourhood guarantee. So what are the conditions to get the money from government? How does that fit into PCSOs and also neighbourhood beat officers, etc.? What I can say as a general point is that the cuts would move us to a far more reactive organisation that deals with response, investigation and statutory functions, and moves us away from a proactive, preventative organisation, which we aspire to be. And again, the details will have to be fleshed out based upon what those final settlements are, and the government are prepared to help us, in terms of the structure and the funding that we've faced for many years.
Thank you. Councillor Woodley.
One question. I'm sure I've heard in the media that proposed new intake of 60 officers in council. Is that correct? Am I correct in that?
It's not operational.
Well, I'm sorry. Yeah, well, that's budgetary income. I'll carry on if you like. Which is, what are the contractual implications on your budget of that? Because obviously, if people have resigned their positions, as I understand it, take on a new position with Lincolnshire Police, and then find the job doesn't exist, there may be contractual implications for the budget as a result. That's a budgetary question as well as.
Did we start with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a decision made by Lincolnshire Police.
Yes.
I don't employ police officers, so it would be, as we've got the chief here, it would make sense for the chief to answer on behalf of his decision making and the organisation.
I understand that, but it has a budget implication, doesn't it? It's a financial implication.
Not necessarily, no.
Not necessarily.
Okay, so the strategy within Lincolnshire, because of the finances as we articulated, is always to try and maximise service for as long as possible before you need to press a button to start reductions. So that's what we've been doing, in the past and since I've been in the chair, quite rightly, because what we want to do is maintain PCSO levels, maintain visibility, etc., etc. Now, linked into that is, complex discussions with the government around things like the conditions around grants, whether there's going to be additional grants for, monies that were given last year and they were promised. And so what we have is quite a strict position around financing in Lincolnshire. It's relatively unique to us, I think, because it's always that kind of last minute hand to mouth decision around, can we recruit, can we bring people in, do we need to reduce? Now, we've been working with government and we continue to want to do so in a collegiate way to try and resolve the situation, which is factually kind of laid out, I think, in terms of the evidence that I've articulated this morning. But up to now, there's been no additional kind of suggestion that those funds will be forthcoming. So therefore, I had to take a difficult decision to cancel the recruitment of 30. We'd been given, most of them had been given verbal agreement that they would start with the force, and I apologise to each and every one of those. Not a situation that we want to be in. But what I also cannot do is take people on that we can't afford to then have to, cut further and deeper subsequently into next year. And I think, what we've seen with the 30, whilst that's very regrettable, I feel for each and every one of them, it pales into insignificance for the challenge that we would face if we have to cut for the numbers that we just talked about. 400 people outside the organisation is considerable. And therefore, I think it was a budgetary decision to balance the books and not one that was taken lightly or easily.
I understand that. I'm concerned with the welfare of the 30 who probably would have resigned from their current positions and now be in limbo because they've been offered a job effectively, not started, been offered a job. And on the basis of that offer, would have resigned, would have no job for their families and their welfare is the prime concern.
And to be also, but I think the question is that we've seen the state of the finances, and it would be equally improper of me to take people on that we can't afford.
Yes, but it may be predictable from the beginning.
Well, if you look at the way that we're funded in this hand-to-mouth position, For example, we were given money, last year, that was promised to be a consistent funding stream that would come forward. We were expecting that, we're trying to engage with government to actually get that confirmed. Therefore, we continued with our plans to maximise services, and what we've ended up with current date, a position where that money is not forthcoming. So therefore, that creates, the environment where these sorts of decisions need to be made.
Thank you very much for that, Chief Constable. I've got three members wanting to come in. Councillor Marsh first.
Thank you, Morning, Chief Constable. Because of the need to maintain officer numbers, will we see a return to officers taking back office jobs? Because it's a constable, but I'm not. A bigger cut in the civilian staff is my first one. And the second one, if we're not going to be training officers, and we've spent an awful lot of money on the new training facility at Skegness, which I think was town's fund, I think, will that affect the town's fund money? Will we have to send it back because we're no longer going to be using it as a training centre because we've got nobody to train?
Okay, so if I deal with the first one, and what we're seeing is a trend across the country because of the uplift parameters of reverse workforce modernisation, essentially, as you say. So putting police officers back into enabling services jobs where it's probably not the best decision, but it's for the service and the knowledge and skills requirement. But just retain officer numbers, so therefore attracts the funding that comes. Now, as I've said, we've not taken any decisions as yet, but we are weighing up the difference between reducing police officer numbers and then what we do in terms of grant. Whether therefore we need to take those choices, that you articulate. Our enabling services staff, our police staff, are massively important to the organisation because they bring a very skill set. Obviously, don't need 40 hours, and therefore to put police officers back into those roles seems counterintuitive to me. But it's part of the kind of conditions and the rules of engagement in terms of funding. So I'm not saying yes, I'm not saying no, it's part of the considerations. Obviously, you appreciate this is kind of like a 4D game of chess, trying to work through how we best maximise the service to the public whilst meeting the kind of fiscal constraints that we face. So it's a possibility that may play out and is part of active consideration as now.
Just on the town deal question, I don't think that's a risk. And the reason for that is it might be new recruits being trained currently, but the existing workforce need continual training. So I've been there recently to see some of the training that's going on, and the facility is doing a great job. And the advantage it has, the officers you have over on the east no longer get extracted to have to go all the way to headquarters to actually do training. So if they've got 3 hours training, it's no longer a day, it's 3 hours. So all of that kind of training will continue. In addition, the facility, part of the town deal board arrangements was that the facilities can be booked by external bodies for use. That continues. So it might be, and we always knew this in Lincolnshire, that recruiting of new recruits ebbs and flows depending on the circumstances, but the facility itself as a training venue continues.
It's not a risk.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Skinner, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Again, it's a question for the Chief, seeing as we've got it. Not just you in the room, but other people in this room have been put in the position of managing uncertainty and having to put strategy beside it. What sort of impact is it making on retention morale amongst the latest cohort? How are you going to manage that?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And I suppose if I set the scene that over the last 3-4 years, when we survey our federated ranks, so up to Chief Inspector, the yearly survey done by the federations, I'm sure people may know. And actually, we're in the top 3 or 4 of many of the categories of that survey in terms of positivity. So we are top in the country for feeling that the organisation is a fair place, for example, which hasn't always been the case. That trajectory is upward. So I think, a positive culture from that perspective. Now, at the moment, what we are doing is obviously being absolutely transparent with our staff, with our public around the funding challenges we face. We're trying to keep it absolutely clear around what decisions have been taken, what haven't. They're the first to know, if and when decisions need to be taken. But, I can't deny that in such a volatile and uncertain scenario, people are concerned, particularly police staff, understandably so. And what we're trying to do is to make sure that we're supporting them as best as we possibly can. And I think, with regard to HMIC and the inspectorate and the causes for concern that, I think you've been briefed on, what we haven't seen yet is the wider report. And actually, Lincolnshire detect far more than the average in the country in terms of crimes. Victim satisfaction is actually 70-odd%. Could it be better? Of course. We've got one of the strongest kind of rape convictions in the country. We answer 999 calls, the fastest in the country. And I think we're almost, focusing so much now on negative. And that, of course, is having an impact. So what we're trying to do is share that success with our staff to say, you're actually doing a good job with what you've got. I would also just say that on the back of that, with regard to HMI, yes, there are things we need to improve. But actually, what we're starting to see play out is years of structural underfunding that's having an impact upon being able to deliver a good strategy over the long term. And that is certainly part and parcel of my thinking, because that's where my thinking factoring lends itself. So we're working very hard to keep making sure we're keeping the morale of our staff up. But inevitably, in such a volatile situation, that's difficult. Thank you.
Thank you. Two members wanting to come in. Mr. Williams first.
Actually, I think probably picking up on your comments there. Much of the briefing that we've had today and last year, as I recall, is predicated, broadly speaking, on existing operating models, existing funding structures. And it does feel, I'm sure it feels more to you than anyone else, a perennial issue that goes on and on and on. But it doesn't get any different, and it gets worse in terms of actual funding, budgets, and the impact of housing resources. And you talked about considering options, considering different alternatives. I just wonder how far your thinking is really going in terms of broader strategic, regional, national options and alternatives. Because if on the one hand what you're saying is that policing in Lincolnshire is going to be denuded increasingly as a result of where we are in the national priority, if that's going to happen, and there is an argument against the regionalisation or nationalisation concepts in the sense that that might have an adverse effect on local policing, it feels to me like there ought to be within your options considerations something going on that broader regional, national, strategic options. And my question really is, and I know it's a difficult question to answer openly if there are in fact discussions going on, but nevertheless, I'd like a sense of whether those sorts of things are on the table, at least as far as you are concerned in Lincolnshire.
Yeah, again, a really incisive question. I think if you look at the kind of macro level, you have probably picked up from the government that police reform is on the agenda. And that is still kind of gathering pace as to what that will look like, but it's likely to lead to a stronger centre for national policing that then stops, every force having to duplicate certain functions, so digital, information technology, etc. Again, that's all still in discussion. From a regional perspective, you'll know that I ran the regional organised crime unit for a lot of years, and I think in Lincolnshire we're very wedded to consider what options there are for additional funding as part of the kind of national, regional, local agenda. The regional is part and parcel of the kind of overall reform piece. From our perspective of thinking differently, I think HMI has given us the stimulus to say, okay, so let's look at this really differently. How would we deliver? I think the challenge for me is that there's a huge momentum to improve and pressure to do so, from this magistrate spectrum. Same time, potentially making deep cuts to an organisation. Whichever way you kind of, the optics you look at that, they just don't sit together. There are some improvements we can make, but you can't increase response times if you're taking a number of people outside of the communications room. So that's why, certainly our discussions with government is around stabilisation to allow us to make those transformations. Because I'm really confident under my leadership, good people in the organisation, what HMIC wanted to do is entirely achievable, not whilst we're cutting deeply. But in terms of kind of the level of innovation that we're applying to our thinking, how much automation, what type of digital offering do we need to? Ironically, in a force that's cash strapped, innovation around digital and technologically enabled to do it. So I can certainly reassure you that the thinking is not constrained to what's always been. We're certainly taking the kind of cliche blank piece of paper approach, but of course this is moving within many other kind of variables and moving parts to actually try and decide what the final solution will be. But certainly I foresee that over the next 5 years, the way national policing works will be very different. And, local policing will be about local policing. What I wouldn't want to see is local policing in a smaller rural force being denuded at the expense of, local policing in big cities.
So if I could just add to that, we've got a very good history of collaborating where collaboration makes sense to collaborate. And you look at the niche system, the recording system we use, all of the East Midlands forces and the City of London are on that same system. There isn't a multi-force system that's done on a greater scale on the planet than that. And we at Lincolnshire led that and put that in place. So there is a huge willingness to work in collaboration where we can do so. The thing that worries me, the nationalisation of some of the regional work we do, such as the regional organised crime units, actually taking a more national approach to standardise. There's some logic to that. What we've got to be careful of is to make sure that if you go, well, we can only do 20 jobs at the moment, which are the worst, most important 20, they're probably not in Lincolnshire. So will Lincolnshire ever then get those kind of organised crime groups and others prioritised in a system that just says, well, have we got bigger jobs in Nottinghamshire, Leicestershire, Derbyshire? And so we've got to make sure that whatever systems come from a national perspective, that we fight to make sure Lincolnshire voice is heard and that the service delivers for the county. And I think that's still the important part that's been worked through as part of this national model, is how you get the local prioritisation built within what should be a better standardised national offer. So hopefully it will be more efficient globally, but will it be more effective for Lincolnshire is the key question.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bradwell, I think you've got a question.
Not a question, really.
Oh, a statement then, maybe.
Well, no, I just wanted to say that, I really do feel for you, because obviously, I live in Woodall Spa. We know we've got police officers who come in. We haven't got any, but we have, and they are part of the community. I know now you are so stretched, but occasionally when they have time, they will walk down the street. They will have some presence, which living in a place where we've got lots of elderly people, I'm getting there as well, I think, is really, really something people residents do like to see. And obviously, you probably won't be able to do those things in the future, but I think I do understand where you are. You are really being starved of funding. You have been for a long, long time. And actually, that's really difficult. Every year you come to setting your budget and that. So I just wanted to say, that at the County Council we fully support everything you're doing. If we can help, we will. But I just think, the government is really putting you in such a position that, it's It's really difficult. And, you know, we're all, probably everybody in this room will support you, but we can't bring you cash. I can't go in the cellar and print you pound notes, you know, because that's not how it works. But, you know, it is about us, I think, standing together with you, you know, as partners, because, you know, it's very difficult. I know where you're going. Many years ago, we had a similar situation here and we had to make very difficult decisions, and it's not easy. So, you know, that's what I want to say, that people here will be there if you want us. I know you won't want us, but I think it's nice for you to know that, you know, we do support everything you're trying to do.
Okay, thank you for that. So we've got still a number of questions on this very important subject. Councillor Pessell next, please. Thank you.
With regard to question 2, Chair, I believe that's already been answered. So
Okay, thank you. So Councillor Beale.
Thank you. Commissioner, good morning. Chief Constable. Been alluded to a degree answered, but being concise, with the potential loss of 200 frontline officers, what are the new proposals to meet the requirements of the Engage report? How are these to be achieved, please?
I'll start us off. I mean, obviously, the Engage process is there for good reason, and it's to help support forces to improve in various areas. It isn't the whole report, and I think that's really important. So there's a wider report that hasn't been published yet, which has got a lot of information in, and there's still some accuracy work that's going on around that, and some pushing back about some of the things that are in there. We're working with HMI to obviously go through that. They understand the financial context that we're in. I suppose what I would say is it's difficult for the inspector because they have a standard that they want everybody to meet that sits outside of the context in which you operate. So I would look at it like this. If they said, well, actually, we're going to judge everybody on whether they've got a brand new 3 Series BMW, and we're going to judge on whether you've got all the whistles and bells that come fixed to that vehicle, and we can afford a Fiat Punto, they go, well, it is a car and it does drive, but you haven't got the same quality sat nav, you haven't got this, you haven't got that, you haven't got the other. And we go, yeah, but we can't afford all of that. They go, that's not really for us to comment on. We're just telling you whether it meets it or doesn't meet it. And so trying to actually contextualize some of that to go, well, what is a reasonable standard given what you have available to work with is quite difficult in a purist system that says yes or no. So there's quite a lot of work going on to try and work with them to understand what we can do with some of that. And obviously some of it is around operational delivery, which is on the chief side. But some of it for me is about how we work with them to get them to contextualize. And actually what's really important for us is the fact that they want to know what we need. They're asking that question. What is it you actually need to be able to provide the service you want to provide? And that's a really important question, which enables us to feed into the system, because we actually wrote ahead of that to everybody in the system, say, look, we want systemic support here. We're facing this huge cliff edge problem. And if I just take 2 things in particular, if you said, well, we want to improve response times, but at the same time, you've got to reduce your overtime costs. Well, which one of those 2 things do you want us to do then? Because we can put more people on overtime to try and achieve the response times, or we can have less people on response and reduce the overtime. And obviously they go, well, we want you to do both. It's not our problem how you do that. It's just our problem to identify that those 2 things are there. So though it's working, and it's going to take some time to work all of that through. So we're working with them, we're working with the system, and it's just going to take time to play out. But I will leave you to comment on anything more specific.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, I mean, first point is that, you know, we are now at the table with the big stakeholders in policing, and now it's a formal process. So despite it being slightly uncomfortable, you know, being held under such level of accountability, the accountability is not just on us now, it's on the policing system to collectively try and resolve this issue. And with regard to our governance in force, what I'm very keen to do, I'm still chasing up, is to have the Home Office, the College of Policing, the Inspectorate around the table. So that actually, when we're having these conversations, they might not take part in the decision making, but they will be proximate to the details and the data and the decisions we have to take. And I think that's really important. But I think, you know, in terms of the need to improve massively, you know, coming into the organisation, you spend a certain time listening, learning, understanding what things are like. You know, I'm not surprised with regard to some of the findings. And actually, I'm really confident we can improve that. Very difficult to do so in a reducing kind of, you know, resource envelope. But I think it's just it's just important to say that, you know, as Mark had mentioned, to see it in context. So, for example, our crime investigations, you know, a lot of what HMIC say in terms of what's good will be, have you got a supervisory, you know, kind of plan? And, you know, has the supervisor looked, and all this kind of important stuff, which I'm not decrying, but it's very much audit against a gold standard. Well, you know, we fell short in some of those issues, and I accept that entirely. But we still investigate and resolve more crime than most of the forces in the country. So it's something about the detail of the process they use, but also what about the macro outcomes? We're actually investigating crime pretty well. It's just, again, the rules of engagement, how they measure it. So, you know, it's going to be an interesting few months in terms of working with Engage, working with the partners around the table, and you know, whichever way we work this out in terms of resources, they're going to have to be party to it. And actually, I really welcome that, because I know what we all want is a sustainable, you know, future for Lincolnshire Police, where we can get on and build a great organisation that I know.
Quick follow up. With the discussions, when do you anticipate the full report coming out? I believe it's end of this month or early next month.
It's April.
It's April.
Yes. Yeah. It's just with us at the moment for factual accuracy checks, and then it goes back, and then it's finalised and it comes out.
Then armlessly. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Burke, you wanted to come in?
Thanks very much, Chair. I mean, I welcome Chief Constable's point about getting everybody around the table. And I've noticed as well, there's something similar coming from Lady Diana, is that policing minister in the Lords, in response to police commissioners' robust debate in public. And she has said that he is very loud and clear that they don't think they're fairly funded. Lincolnshire's funding problems more generally needs to be looked at. So I welcome that. But she added, and I think this is presumably because she's read the full report, that there are other issues in Lincolnshire with the force, and some of the previous financial decisions. Now, I don't know what that means, and you might not either until you can see the full report. But I guess, I mean, I was talking to Hamish Faulkner last night as well, and he's making similar points, and you've had a robust debate with him as well. I also welcome. But so what's in my mind then, Chair, without being too wordy, is are there elements like Lady Diana and members of the government that we can be talking to more fiercely drive home the need for the change to the funding settlement, isn't it, that we need?
Yeah,
funding settlement.
I suppose what I'd say to that is, I have always not been shy about criticising government, and it certainly isn't a political debate I want to engage in. The previous government had many years in which to put a new funding formula in place, and although they've got one now and it's sat on a shelf ready to go, it's the most frustrating thing that somebody called the general election before it was put in place. And I was not shy about starting a judicial review against the previous government. And actually, it was most inconvenient that he called the general election, because that would have been a much better device to use against the previous government in the run up to a general election. But it is what it is. And I stand absolutely ready to work with all of our MPs, ministers of any political colour. I've never, ever tried to score party political points in doing this job. I think it's just not in the interest of the public of Lincolnshire. And I've taken that approach with our councils, councillors and everybody. I think that's not the way they're used to working maybe, and there's still a getting to know you period where, you know, that kind of open approach going, look, let's just work for the greater good isn't the norm, maybe. So yes, I mean, we had a meeting scheduled with the police minister for this week, but she's had to reschedule it, so it's now next week, but hopefully that will go ahead. So engagement continues. I think what's very frustrating for me, and I am going to be cautious in what I'm saying, I don't necessarily think the way the reports by the inspectorate are created are necessarily the best place to discuss finance when finance specialists are not the people that are doing the inspections. Okay. Over a decade or more, we have been very open to inviting the Home Office and others to come in, look at our books, look at our issues, look at our challenges, and every single time they've come, they've said, you are efficient, you are effective, you're doing the right things, and bottom line, you haven't got enough money. Instantly, that suddenly changed because, you know, so we've got the same finance people, we've got the same finance approach that's been there for all of that time. All of these independent people coming in have said, you're fine, you're doing a great job, you just haven't got enough. Suddenly, one report says it's different. So I'm just saying we need to be cautious about that because we are doing a good job. We are managing our finance. And when they talk about things like, well, you can be more efficient with your estate, a conscious decision was made, a strategic decision was made not to sell the estate. And that sits on my side of the fence. So it was an operational decision to keep it, but the selling of it would be on my side. Because the government was saying, we want to see more neighbourhood police officers. Now, how silly would we look if we'd sold off all the neighbourhood buildings ahead of knowing what that government was going to do? Because if they suddenly said you're getting an extra 100 PCSOs and we'd just sold all the buildings, so we've had to mothball them and wait to understand. So then to be criticised for the fact that you own that is, I'm afraid, not the way I would see it. I think we made a sound choice based on the information we had at the time. So I think there are lots of elements to this that if you just read a report and then comment on it, isn't necessarily giving you the full picture. So I think I am very keen to work with ministers, very keen to work with our MPs, and hopefully we can come to a happier conclusion than the one we're currently facing. We're still hopeful that we can work with them to get some funding to try and stave off at least some of what we're facing.
Okay, thank you. I mean, there's three scenarios here. There's you get more money from government, you get more money from the public of Lincolnshire, or you have to make these significant cuts. So when I go to money from the people of Lincolnshire, why don't you go for a referendum? You've had consultation, which is indicating that members of the public are well prepared to give you more money.
And it's a really good question. And I think there's two elements to this. Firstly, it would cost us around £1 to £1.5 million to do it. So that's not making my situation any better. The second element to that is the fact that the way it's designed in law is pretty much putting loaded dice in the game. You've got to ask a very specific question. I am not allowed to articulate or lobby for one particular outcome. And it's basically, are you prepared to pay this much more in your council tax? That's it. Now, nobody's going to win that. You can't go to the public and go, I want you to vote on whether you want to pay more money in tax, but I'm not going to tell you why, what it's for, what the problem. It's nonsense. So I'm afraid there's only ever been one referendum held and it failed, and that was in Bedfordshire. And it was destined to fail from the start because of this reason. And the legislation, whilst it sometimes gets talked about as, oh, well, of course you can do this. Nobody in their right mind, frankly, waste £1.5 million of local taxpayers' money on a loaded dice game of that. It's just not practical.
Thank you. Councillor Pessel.
Thank you, Chair. An article appeared in the Lincolnshire Live on February the 1st that includes quotes from PCC, Chief Constable and parts of this report, specifically sections 3.1 to 3.5 of item 7. Will the PCC assure the committee that measures will be taken to find both the source of where this leak came from and ensure members that they will be the first recipients of future reports, not the press, even if such information is well intended?
Obviously, we send the papers to the panel for circulation. And at that point, I don't know when they get published by the panel, but ahead of your meeting, you do publish the papers. So I don't know if that was the legitimate source of where that came from. But everybody in this room would have had the papers, so I've got no control over how the media would receive that. But it would seem logical to me, because normally a week ahead of this meeting is when the papers are published for this meeting. Yeah, and my decision around that was taken at the end of January. But yeah, so the papers potentially were already in the public domain at that point, is the point I'm making.
Right, thank you.
Okay, you've got a further question, further 2 questions, Councillor Pessel. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Annex A mentions the amount of feedback that that was received in regard to the potential precept uplift. Whilst this did apparently equal a record turnout, a record number in terms of response, this was a particularly small percentage of respondents in terms of the overall population of Lincolnshire. Given that there are serious budgetary pressures, does this lack of overall response indicate the engagement mediums being used to gauge public opinion are as effective as they could be, and do they not perhaps undermine the case for the BCC's argument, given that even at such a time of budgetary concern, you can't motivate the public to get behind you?
I would say, Councillor, I think you misunderstand the nature of these kind of surveys. So when national surveys are undertaken, it's around 1,056 respondents across the country are taken, which gives a sort of confidence interval of about between 3 and 4%, which basically means that when they publish a national survey, they're able to say with confidence that their answers are correct within 3 to 4% of what, if they surveyed everybody, what the outcome would be. So we're getting 4 times that just for Lincolnshire, which gives a confidence interval of about 1.5, which is exceptional for a survey of this nature. And what I would point you to is, I don't know the exact number, but I would arguably say I should think North Stevens consultation on council tax probably got a similar number of respondents from North Stephen that I did. Less. Usually it's about the same, but sometimes the council's consultations are slightly less because of the nature of a policing survey. So if your assertion is correct, that means most of the councils that are putting their council tax up are doing exactly the same on the same flawed basis. And I don't believe they are. So we use a company who are specialists in this work to make sure we get a confidence interval of under 2%, and they've exceeded that with 1.5. So I've got every confidence that the numbers are correct. In addition to that, slightly more anecdotal, but recently Lincolnshire Live ran an article a couple of days ago where they had also done some survey work and consulted residents about whether, given the financial situation, they'd be prepared to pay more, and that was overwhelmingly in support as well. So even less scientific, but nevertheless independent reports are done, it's coming up with the same answer. So I've got a high level of confidence in the results we've got.
Okay, thank you.
Next question.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Chair. I'm going to vary my question slightly in light of the information that we've been given regarding the breakdown of the budget, budgetary reserves, I should say.
Yeah.
Given that Lincolnshire Police has been stated to be chronically underfunded over the past 12 years under the current funding scenario, current funding formula, and yet has managed to accrue reserves of 32.7 million. Can we have confidence that the management of these resources in terms of particularly the capital programs that have been instigated, including IT and other hardware resources, have been done so in a manner that allows for the continuing lack of significant investment in the force, given that there was no prospect of changes in the funding formula?
Yes.
Right. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Okay, well, that completes our questions regarding precept, Commissioner, unless there's any other member would like to ask a question. So the proposal is that the council tax increase 25-26 is £13.95 for a Band D property, which with this increase, total council tax income will provide 3.8 million more funding than in 24-25. So can I have a proposer for that? Councillor Beale, seconder. Councillor Pessel. So all in favour? You can vote. Any against? Any abstain? One against, one abstain, so that is passed. So that proposal, Commissioner, for your increase in council tax has been agreed by this. Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
So before we move on then, if you can get an extra 3.8 million, we've got a 14 million pound funding gap. Did you want to go, Julie?
I was just popping outside.
Oh, sorry. 3.8, roughly 4 million pound from the council tax. And if you put 10 million pound reserves to that, you would.
That's already banked. On the 14 assumes we got the council tax, so we're still left with 14.
Yeah, I'm with you. Thank you.
Sadly.
Yes, sadly. Yeah,
Very sadly.
thank you. Okay, we'll move on then to the next part of the meeting. And Chief Constable, you're very welcome to stay for this part. And thank you for your responses this morning. So far, I assume you may get some more questions. So it's the delivery of the police and crime plan at item 8. Commissioner, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I know everybody will have read the report, so I'm just happy to take any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you. So the first question is Councillor Beale. Thank you, Councillor Beale.
Thank you. Thank you. As Lincolnshire Police had previously been placed in Engage, was the latest inspectorate report expected? If so, why? What actions from the previous Engage plan were not implemented? If it was unexpected, is this saying that the previous actions were not sufficient or not monitored and followed properly? Thank you.
Just to be clear, there wasn't a previous Engage report. So from that point of view, I failed to implement a previous one because there hasn't been one. So that's the first bit.
Just sorry to hold you back there, but there was a previous Peel inspection.
There was, but that wasn't the question, Chair.
No, but I think it's about terminology. I appreciate Engage is new, but it's always been about inspection.
Yeah, that's what I was going to go on to say, but I just wanted to clarify because it's quite an important point that if it's on the record. So there isn't a previous Engage report. the HMI reports are always an iterative process because you're always trying to improve things and move things. One of the challenges, obviously, with a smaller force is quite often you're moving resource from one place to another to try and meet a moving target. So if they say, well, you need to do better at this, you take resource from somewhere else, and then strangely next time they might criticise the place you take the resource from to have met their last objective. So it is a very difficult balance for anybody to achieve everything if you haven't got the resources. There is a robust monitoring process in place. I've got confidence in the governance structure that we have, and on top of that, we've created a new governance structure to enable a high level of interaction to meet the engage objectives, but also that sits alongside what we're doing regarding the future model for Lincolnshire. So we understand the connectivity and the linkage, and we're making sure that both of that comes together. And any strategic decisions we need to take a formal decision on still come through to our strategic board, which is part of the formal governance structure. So we're confident that there is robust and appropriate monitoring on all of these different elements. But nobody's ever going to get to the point where the inspector says, that's it, you've achieved everything, it's perfect. And actually, it would be inconceivable to take 14 million out of this organisation, rising to 20, and see anything but a decline in service. That's an inevitability. As much as I've got a high level of confidence in the chief in managing the impact on the community and the organisation, there's no grey area here. If you have fewer police officers and staff, it will take longer to do things. Whether that's answer the phone or turn up to a call, those will be the implications of this. So I'm in no doubt in the future, the inspectorate will have something to say about those things, which is why we're engaging with them, not just in the engage bit, but also in our future planning model to make sure that they're fully aware of what we're doing and they can comment and work with us to try and make the best of what we've got, because they will in the future be critical of saying, well, you're not delivering the gold standard in everything. Well, that will be correct.
So to a degree, this inspectorate's report was not totally unexpected.
Well, in the sense that new chief constable coming in, so obviously you'll be aware quite often the report is a legacy report, so it's looking backwards rather than forwards. So you've got new chief constable that's come in. That the recruitment process was designed to try and get a chief constable that could face the future challenges of the force, which includes managing areas for improvement, the finances and everything else. And I've got a high level of confidence that we've achieved that in appointing the chief that we've got. So I think there will be challenges moving forward, but we've got the right people leading the police organisation to try and meet those. But yeah, I mean, it's not. We wouldn't be doing the best job we could if we weren't aware of issues as they come along. And quite often the process with HMI is that the force actually sit down with HMI and go, these are the areas we know we need to do better with. So quite often the things that they put in their report have been identified by the force in the first place. And that's how it should be, really.
Thank you. You refer to the serious violence strategy in your report, and we all know that there's been that sad case in the country around a stabbing at school in a different part of the country. And I'm just sort of seeking assurance regarding the serious violence strategy that there's work going on in schools in Lincolnshire around that.
Yeah, I mean, it is a partnership space, as you know, regarding sort of working with young people generally. And, you know, we always want to work closely with our colleagues on that. You know, there is the new serious violence strategy that's come out to ensure that young people better understand the risks and drivers for serious violence to prevent them being drawn into crime. We obviously have a centre over at Sleaford that's happening to look specifically around knife crime and violent crime. Which again is a really good resource and one that we want to see retained in Lincolnshire. Again, it comes at a cost. So those are the kind of tough decisions that are always going to be under consideration when it's police officers or you know, provisions such as that happening. We've also sit on the serious violence core priority group, which is a partnership space with Lincolnshire County Council and others to really make sure that we've got that joined up approach in Lincolnshire. So I am confident that young people are getting a good level of input. Again, we could do more with more, couldn't we? I mean, if the county council's budget's under pressure, our budget's under pressure, we will do our best with partnership working, but it's always going to be what you can afford to do based against risks. And that's the important thing to remember.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Mr. Williams?
Yeah, if I could just add very
Sorry, yeah.
So from our presentation today, on Mark's point, that number of pupils that receive preventative or reactive education sessions from our offering, knife crime, 5,500, ASB and gang recruitment, 6,500, county line, 6,500, hate crime, 4,000. And we anticipate nearly 1,800 going through the happening as well. And we shared this with the HMI for good practice, because actually these sorts of sessions in some courses just are not delivered. And to actually engage with that many pupils, which is a good number, it is actually really positive. And I've certainly noticed that coming back into the force and good practice around that.
Thank you for that, Chief Constable. That's very helpful. Councillor Beale?
Thank you. Thank you. Quick observation with the happening at Sleaford, having sort of been through the presentation, etc. I'm fairly sure when you see the video of the actual incident, whilst the chap's holding the knife, it's his friend who pushes him that causes the actual incident, which highlights sort of just the danger of carrying a knife, not necessarily the potential of using it. Is that how it's perceived?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, it's well known, isn't it? If you carry a knife, with whatever circumstances, it's more likely to be used to cause harm. And that's certainly, what we're trying to instill in our education cohort around, the dangers of knives overall and some of the issues around county lines and, the way that instills kudos around significant levels of violence. So yeah, I think the way that it's delivered against the as well is it's actually really positive, and no doubt it's a good impact on students and people.
It's coming
Councillor Bradwell?
Yeah, on the happening, because actually I was just thinking, groups can go out to the happening and have a look and experience what the students experience. And I have to say, some of it will make people sit back, because it goes through right from starting from a stabbing through to different rooms. And I've been, and I know lots of secondary schools have been, and they say the young people do come back thinking slightly differently. Not to say that if they got into with some friends that they will change, but it is very, very thought-provoking, I have to say. I don't know whether, Mr. Chairman, if some members wanted to go and you go there and experience what I've experienced. And I went with one of the officers as well. We both went round. And yeah, it is, I think it's a brilliant place.
I think we've already had an invite, and there's been an invite to the panel for individual members to come in.
Some of us have been, and I agree with you.
Yeah. I mean, it clearly is a first-class initiative, and hopefully, and I appreciate the challenges and difficulties around the funding, but hopefully you can maintain it.
Still got the pen.
Right, Mr. Williams, please. Thank you.
We have confirmed the funding for the next financial year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Williams?
If I may, can I wrap my two questions up in the broader point that we discussed before?
Yes, by all means.
Just in the one piece, if you like. If you may have noticed, I was a bit conflicted in terms of the support for the precept increase, and I think the reason is I hear everything that you've briefed us on the financial constraints, the operational pressures, and the political uncertainties that the force continues to exist in. And whilst your report, your plan update, is very informative and very useful, what I feel I'm missing somehow in order to make a sort of come to an informed conclusion about how the force is doing and the extent to which I can offer support for proposals is, when I looked at your report, what I did is I went back to the performance review meeting report in November 24, which you published. I think that's the sort of the follow-on from the public assurance meeting briefings that you used to conduct. I'm not sure when the last one was, but at least in that report, I get a sense of the impact that initiatives and expenditure and effective utilisation of resources is having, and where stuff is actually making a difference out there, not making a difference, where your priorities might necessarily have to be flexed in relation to your police plan that you set out at the beginning of the year or at the beginning of the period. And I'm not seeing these things dovetail to the extent that I can confidently say, yeah, I get the constraints that you're operating under. I get the expectations, if you like, of the public in relation to the surveys and questionnaires you put out and your plan. But I don't see all of this being pulled together somehow in a form that can allow us to have a better discussion, if you like, a more informed or engaged discussion about the difference that all that stuff that you've mentioned in your plan is making against your aspirations and within the limitations that we discussed this morning in terms of budgets and so on. And so what I'm really asking you is there some way that in future you can consider in the report that you give us, melding, I'm not suggesting you cobble them together as they stand, because obviously that report that you produced in November is a very different sort of forum. But for this panel to be able to get a clearer sense of the impact and the outcomes, if you like, the outputs of all of those initiatives and all the funding, the additional funding that you're getting, so that we can see, oh yeah, you know, that's where the pressures really are. That's where you're really achieving stuff. That's where you're not achieving as much as you would like to. And we understand that in the broader context of the resource constraints that you're operating under. Do you get what I mean? So yeah, I could go on, but I think in a sense, what I'm saying is a clear articulation of effectiveness and efficiencies, and including, you did comment in really useful brief that we got yesterday on the reserve funding policy. And you talked about, now I don't know if this is a new initiative, but an annual value for money and efficiency plan that you're going to review, that the chief is going to produce for you. I think that's how it's presented. I've been really interested in that because what you've talked about today is delivery of your operational plan more or less as it stands, and what things are going to affect and limit your ability to do that. But actually what we're not talking about a great deal, apart from your comment about why you haven't, for example, disposed of some of the estate, is where the savings are being made. And most of your profiles on the plans are either level or going up. There's nothing that's really indicating efficiency. So pulling all of that together would give us, and me personally, a better sense of, oh, right, okay, I get the more complete picture now upon which I can make an assessment or ask an informed question about how things are going.
I suppose if I can, what I would say is, I feel you're conflating setting a budget with having a decision about council tax. The two are very, very different, and we haven't set a budget, and I'm not presenting the budget to you. For me, and this may and please forgive me on this, it may be that I look at this differently, but I look at it and go, what's the democratic will of the public? That's why I do a robust consultation. It is clear the public of Lincolnshire do not want an additional £3.5 million of cuts to policing on top of 14 million. They have overwhelmingly supported in every district the need for an increase in council tax. I believe it's undemocratic to go against the will of the people. I've always said, if I came to you and the public did not support an increase, I would not be proposing one. And so personally, that's how I feel that if you represent a democratic body around the county, I am the only democratically elected person that has to get the permission of all the other councils who all set their own council tax to be able to set council tax. And so forgive me, you don't represent a council, so this isn't your natural sort of bailiwick, if you like, where what your questioning is. I believe this is a fairly simple question. Have I carried out a robust process to ascertain what the public view is regarding council tax and their wishes regarding the police service? Have we demonstrated that there's a need and impact on policing if we don't get it? And I think the clear answer to that is yes. So personally, I think that's enough to support a council tax increase. But everybody has their own choice to make. I accept that. It's not a secret ballot behind closed doors for councillor allowances or whatever. It's an open forum for everybody to make a decision, and they are accountable to their individual local authorities. But I don't think that can be conflated with the budget and those decisions that then can be taken, because we can't set the budget till we know how much council tax we've got. So it's not that we're trying to hide it, we just haven't got that detail of the council tax setting process.
Yeah, no, forgive me, perhaps I didn't explain myself clearly. I've asked this question in this part because it relates, my question really is about your report in relation to progression of the plan. And the fact that we sat here today talking about the precept, yes, that's a distinct and discrete issue. But what I am saying is, what I found particularly useful in reading, in preparing for today's meeting, was the November operational performance report, which gave me a sense of where the pressures were in relation to what you are delivering as part of your policing plan, the 4-year policing plan. And what you provide us with is a very informed analysis of current initiatives and additional grants and funding and all that sort of thing. But what I'm not getting a sense of in your report is how effective is policing in Lincolnshire? How's it going? And where are the real pressure points? I'm only getting that by looking at the two things in conjunction. And it's not our place here to roll the sleeves up and start asking you detailed questions. But I think it would be helpful if there was a way in which you could, when you're providing us with the information for these forums, look at those two things and say, okay, how can the panel take a more holistic and perhaps better informed view, not just about the things that you've outlined, but more about impacts. I had a question on ASB, for example. Now, yeah, I could ask it, but I'm not really achieving a great deal other than a bit of clarification about antisocial behaviour in isolation. But what that does play to is utilisation of resources, where the pressures are, what's happening in community policing and neighbourhood policing, that sort of thing. And it just makes more sense by looking at those two things in conjunction with each other. You may say, well, by all means, look at the two things to each other. But I thought that the report to this panel might be
I suppose what I would say, and this is a bit deja vu, the panel can request information in formats they wish, and we can discuss how that works. And we are currently providing in a way that has been agreed. I suppose the other thing I would say is you're not the police authority, you're not holding the police to account. If we start giving you detailed information about policing, believe me, I know we will end up in discussions about operational policing. So there is a point that you are here to, in one bracket, support, and in another bracket, scrutinise the decision making around the PCC and the plan, not the operational policing side. But as I said before, through the chair, we can provide reports, we can have discussions about what format this body requires information, but I don't think that's a bilateral conversation between me and you. That's through the chair and the committee. So I'll await any further developments in that respect.
Is that something we could take forward then, outside of the meeting?
I'll be honest, I'm not massively keen, because I think it'll stray into operational, but I'm happy to have the discussion.
I think from my perspective as chair, your report does contain a lot of operational material, and that's why sometimes panel members can drift into operational.
I'm happy to take out any operational references or adjust it if you feel that will help. I mean, want to give context, that's all.
I mean, I asked a question, didn't I, about the serious violence strategy. Arguably, you could say that's operational. And arguably, you could say it's a key strategic area for the force. So it's getting the balance right.
Yeah.
I, as chair, will try and stop the operational questions on your behalf, because we're not, as you quite rightly say, we're not here to talk about. But I think Mr. Williams is basically saying your report contains a lot of good input, but we don't necessarily get outcomes. And that's what, as a panel, that's what we're looking for. So I think it doesn't take a lot of work to actually introduce outcomes into your report.
But as I say, we can happy to have discussions. I've always said that.
Yeah, I know you
I'm
have,
not
yeah.
wanting to be obstructive. If there's things
No, I know
we
you.
need to help, then we will.
I know you. Well, we'll take that forward outside of this meeting. Thank you. Councillor Pessel, next question, please.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to 2.14, the police partnership pilot on youth diversion, what is the supporting evidence for measures included in this programme, and how will the success and value for money of this programme be measured?
I'll come back to you in writing if I can, councillor, rather than giving you a bit of an answer, because then I can give you proper detail.
That's fine, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Williams?
Well, no,
I think, yeah, I thought you might. Okay, thank you. In your report, you do refer to the purpose of the Future Links Board. And I just wondered what that is and who chairs it.
That might be one to pass to the chief.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Yep. So I chair it.
Yeah.
Essentially, what it is the overall response to HMIC specific recommendations, which are quite specific, and also the wider transformation in inverted commas around what is reductions and reorganisation of the operating model. So those two boards sit and are chaired by the Deputy Chief Constable. I then chair the Future Links Board, which sits above those. And this is also where we have our strategic stakeholders that sit with us, and we're just finalising who they are to make sure that they're at the table as well. So I'm just really keen to take, a firm grip of the need to transform and making sure we're doing it in the best way possible. But obviously, as we said, against the backdrop of what appears to be at the present quite deep cuts, hopefully that may change. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
Said as well to the context that I sit across all three.
Yeah.
So the operational ones, not in this position, but to understand the development of conversation behind the decision, rather than sitting on the Future Links Board without the context of decision making. So that's been really well welcomed by the force and a part of all three parts of the process, rather than just the strategic board. So I have that underpinning understanding before it's then taken to stakeholders.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you. I was going to ask you a question regarding the closure of policing, but you've already explained the rationale around that.
I'm happy to just give you another bit of information around that, if I may.
Yeah, of course.
At the moment, there's 57 buildings across Lincolnshire that are owned, ostensibly by the Police and Crime Commissioner, but obviously operationally used. Some of those are mothballed and are unlikely, I think, to suddenly be required for additional policing use, although that hasn't been confirmed, but it's unlikely. Part of my consultation this year was asking the very question around buildings versus spend on people, and overwhelmingly people understood that investing in having frontline officers and staff was more important than the buildings. So I can see in the coming weeks and months that rationalisation around, well, how many buildings do we need operationally? And whilst I await the detail of that, I would fully expect it to be a significantly fewer number than the one we currently have. But I can't give you any specific detail because that's currently being worked up.
Okay, well, thank you. That's helpful. Yeah.
Taking that on a stage further, Commissioner, if you do get rid of the satellite stations, the hubs, what I'm going to call them, can I hope that you will link in with the local community hubs so that you can have surges there by your officers or PCSOs running in the area and set surges up so that local people can know when somebody's going to be there? And I know we have the problem that if there's something happens operationally, you can't guarantee they'll be there. But I can tell you, as far as I know, I never seen anybody on foot in Alford in the last year. I think I've only ever seen people going through twice. Now, for me, that's good because it means we've really got no crime. But it doesn't help the confidence bit of the people wanting to see police officers and just chew the fat of them, if you like.
Yeah, I suppose what I would say is, firstly, any building disposal, we would obviously communicate with local communities well, because obviously they might wish to use some of those buildings, etc. So we want to work with communities to make sure the communities flourish. I think I can't speak operationally for the model that will be used, but if the worst case scenario happens, I doubt there'll be much availability for people to be doing surgeries anywhere. But that's an operational decision for the chief side of the fence once the new model emerges. But I'm sure where they can, they'll make use of community hubs, because it's obviously the place you go to, the place where you find the people, don't you? The only thing I would say, councillor, is that obviously I have been on foot patrol in Alford with police officer and sergeant. So they do it. But what I would point out is you're here today. If they're there now, you wouldn't necessarily see them. So I think one of the challenges the police has is how well they articulate and publicise when and where they have been. Because if, as council, it would be really useful for you if you knew that the police had been there today and had done a foot patrol, because you could then be telling the community that that had happened. So that's one of the things. When I spoke before about increasing visibility of the police, that doesn't necessarily mean you can afford more people, but what it does mean, you can articulate what your people are doing to a better degree. And I think that's really important. And the example I would give is when in Sleaford, local community was saying they've got a problem with mainly young people with modified cars on a Friday, Saturday night hanging around the leisure centre car park, and it was causing some disturbance. That was raised by the neighbourhood team with the road policing unit, who went down, gave some words of advice, see some vehicles with no insurance and having too much tin on the windows, all those things. And the road policing unit publicised that through social media. I was then able to put that on the community Facebook groups, and hundreds of people were engaging with that, saying, oh, that's great, that's what we want to see. But unless it had gone onto those forums, they wouldn't have known unless they happened to be at the leisure centre on that day at that time. So I think that's where I think policing nationally needs to get smarter, is how it communicates what's going on, because we want the people of Alford to know when policing is happening in their area.
I couldn't agree more with it.
Councillor Beale, you wanted to come in?
Thank you. It was just a follow-up really with regards to reviewing the sort of mothballed locations, but there are also going to be talks with the Chief Constable regarding PCSOs, but I imagine that's all wrapped up with what funding you get.
Yeah, I mean, there isn't anybody with Lincolnshire Police that isn't valued. It doesn't matter what their role is. Over the years, we're a very lean organisation, and PCSOs are a vital part of that infrastructure that is Lincolnshire Police today. So nobody's sat here rubbing their hands together at having to make changes to the budget. And obviously with the neighbourhood policing guarantee, we're still trying to work through exactly the detail, what that means. Can we keep that money? If so, what can we spend it on? So there's a lot of moving parts, but obviously, first and foremost, we want to make sure the people who work for the organisation are kept informed as much as can be, because obviously it's a worrying time for them, frankly. I mean, it's people's livelihoods. It's really important that they feel valued in that space. And obviously it's worrying for the communities that the police serve, which is why we're trying to be as honest as possible. The difficulty is there's so many moving parts. One day we're talking 14 million and then it moves. So to give you an example, there was an expectation that we would receive around £4 million for the policing of Scampton last year as a result of the failed attempt by the Home Office to open it as an asylum centre, which would reimburse our costs. So we'd already spent the money. I've received a letter this morning offering us £136,000. Now, that's not helpful. So had I received £4 million, I'd now be saying to the chief, great news. Next year, we've got an additional 4 million to play with. We can actually move some of these pieces around. That gives us a bit more flexibility. Instead, I've got £136,000. So they're the kind of things. So that's hot off the press this morning. We're still getting that level of information, which has just affected us by £4 million today. So we're trying really, really hard to work with officials and ministers. And all I can say is we will do our best to retain as much service as humanly possible. nobody comes into any kind of public service delay to try and reduce it.
Thank you, greatly appreciated. I know it's a lot of workload where they do talk about police, it is about the missing the PCSO that we have there. Thank you.
Chair, if I could just-
Yeah, by all means.
I think, the really stark contrast is if we compare the number of community beat managers and PCSOs that we have in this county compared to a town in northeast Lincolnshire, a town, we've probably got about the same amount to cover the county as they have to cover the town. That's not to say that they're wrong. Julie mentioned earlier on around Suffolk, the next least funded force in our midsummer fourth group would have an extra 200 officers. Went to Cumbria's values, we would have 1,000 extra officers. I said very clearly to the chief inspector at HMI, do you think we'd be sat here if we had that level of funding, even half that level of funding? I'm absolutely convinced the answer would be no, because I'm really, really confident that we can actually deliver the service that are needed. You can't do it with one hand tied behind your back.
No, we appreciate that, Chief. Thank you very much. I was going to ask you a question around ceasing of some of the activities. You already alluded to that very good initiative that's happening. And I know you've responded to that. And clearly that is a risk around your financial situation, that some of these really good initiatives that you're carrying out at the moment, you may have to cease those as well as making cuts to officer numbers, PCSOs or whatever.
I mean, some of the challenges we get is because we're pretty good at getting in one-off funding for different initiatives, so the Safer Streets funds and whatever. And a lot of that is up to government where they continue issuing new rounds of bidding for that kind of stuff. Well, they're very good at creating new initiatives, but you usually can't spend it on maintaining one. You have to come up with a new shiny thing. You can't keep the thing you've already got and proved it works going. So it is quite difficult sometimes to find the money to keep good things going. But we have got small pockets of money, like proceeds of crime funds, that we can use on initiatives that are specifically designed to keep communities safe and reduce criminality. So we work really hard to maximise the use of those things which aren't core policing budget. So we try not to compete directly between, shall we have a police officer or shall we have that happening? But ultimately, there is a point at which those spending envelopes converge and you can't do as much as you would like to do. And certainly around the victim space where funding has reduced, we obviously have got challenges providing services across 2,500 square miles of Lincolnshire on a funding formula that disadvantages us. So we want to maintain as much funding as we can for our victim services, but we don't yet know what the new spending round is going to look like. But we did see a reduction in that this year. So there is always that pull between the different elements, but it's worked through intelligently to try and make sure, the impact as little as possible in the various different ways.
Thank you very much. Next question, Councillor Pessel.
Thank you, Chair. What is the cost going to be of the facial recognition software? How will its cost effectiveness be measured? And how can reassurance be given that earlier problems that were identified with the misidentification of people, but specifically those from certain ethnic minorities, can people have faith that this will no longer be a problem by the time it's implemented?
Well, I'll answer the last bit first, which is that there's already 100% guarantee around that at a national level. So the Metropolitan Police have been running live facial recognition for some time. And in the last 12 months, my understanding is it had only one incident where it misidentified somebody and it misidentified the identical twin of the person they were looking for. So it wasn't a bad shout, if I'm honest, that it did that. It's now something like they need an eighth of your face to be able to guarantee identification. Pretty impressive stuff. So facial recognition does work. It does not have bias against ethnicity, colour, anything like that now. All of that's been worked through at a national level. It's beyond my pay grade to understand how or why, but it's been tried, tested and proven. I understand that when South Wales were initially developing this, they had some issues and it went to court and the judge said they needed to have a 1 in 1,000 accuracy for it to be considered legitimate. And at the time, they were able to prove 1 in 6,000, which obviously is significantly better. And now it's just improving and improving and improving. So I think that's a really important point, that we need to have confidence. The other thing is about what it's used for. And we need robust governance around this. We don't live in a police state, you know, where your face is used to penalise you for various things. So in some countries around the world, there is now a social contract that you gain points for being good and walking across the road when the lights tell you to, and you lose social points if you don't, all based on facial recognition. And if your point score drops too far, you can't access certain services. Like you're not allowed to pay for parking, for example. You're not allowed to use public car parks at all because you've been naughty and not followed the state's rules. We don't want to be there. So there has to be robust governance around these processes, and I'm confident that we will not have those kind of problems in the UK. Regarding the cost, well, a lot of the cost has already happened because through the Safer Streets funding, we've upgraded the CCTV around the county and it's already got the functionality in it. It's just not switched on. So we're working with district partners. We can actually use some of that already if we get our act together. So a lot of that is about just working together. And I had the CCTV review that I commissioned across the county, and that's given us a really good baseline for understanding what's out there and what functionality happens. So very minimal cost to Lincolnshire because we've already upgraded to have the capability. What we might need to have is some kind of capability to actually, if we were going to pipe it all into one place from across the county. So that's something that is desirable, but we might not be able to afford until funding comes along. Nationally, there's a programme of work going on which is looking at getting facial recognition through to the handheld pronto devices that officers have. And again, because this is a national initiative, it's not something that's directly a local cost, but I'm sure at some point, you know, things get top sliced and we will pay for it in the end. But that will provide a very different capability to officers across the country to be able to recognise. So, for example, if you had somebody in front of you on the roadside who refused to give you their name and address or whatever, we have at the moment got some mobile fingerprint scanners which are helpful, but obviously having the ability to get instant facial recognition using DVLA records and everything else would save an awful lot of time for everybody because you're not arresting them, taking them somewhere else and then releasing them. So there will be huge advantages to this, but governance around assurance to the public that they're not being overly intrusive is key. I think that's really, really important. So PCCs and others are working closely with government to make sure that governance piece is right. Thank you.
Another couple of questions. Yeah, Councillor Prestle. Thank you.
Given the predicted shortfall, given the predicted budget shortfall that has been raised previously, will new systems like the LEDS provide potential savings of time, money, and manpower? And what is the implementation period looking like for that system?
Yeah, I mean, the assessment of the LEDS programme was undertaken in December 24 by the Home Office, and it has been published. So that a link, I'm sure, can appear in the minutes or whatever you need to do to circulate it. But it is a national programme, so I don't think there's a date as yet for its rollout.
March 26.
Was it March 26? Okay, so
Thank you.
That's the timeline.
Thank you. And your final question, Councillor Prestle.
Looking at section 614, magistrates have recently been issued with new tougher sentencing guidelines in relation to hair coursing and associated offences. Do you feel that this is a positive step, especially in relation to additional offences stemming from the coursing inquiries and arrests? And could you elaborate on any such upchain successes that have occurred recently and will hopefully improve going forward?
Yeah, I mean, the changes in legislation around hair coursing were brought about directly by Lincolnshire police officers working on this. And it was a huge piece of work and a really, really well executed one. So, for example, we were the first force in the country, I think it was back in 2016, 17, when I put a budget together to actually seize dogs from courses. So we were the first to do that and kennel them while they were awaiting trial. And that was hugely impacted because the one thing you can't do without a dog is hair course. So that was really impactful, and we saw a real sea change in attitude amongst horses. And to be clear, they're not local little poachers having a bit of fun. This is organised criminality and people travelling large distances to commit crime. And it isn't just the coursing; it's the criminal damage, it's the threats of violence, it's the high-speed driving, burning vehicles, all kinds of things. So it's a bad activity all round. What we managed to achieve was that, as part of the new legislation changes Lincolnshire pushed for, the full cost recovery of kenneling could then be put as part of the sentencing. Massively important. Things like driving bans could be implemented for going equipped to hair course, which was a new thing. Being able to actually give people criminal behaviour orders, which actually banned them from certain parts of the country, so they couldn't carry out that activity. Making sure so their dogs were permanently rehoused, and in some cases, not just the hair coursing dogs, but all family dogs. If they were mistreating their hair coursing dogs, why would you leave them with other dogs in the home? So really big changes. And to give you an example, there was two guys from Middlesbrough who claimed to be walking their dogs over near Boston, and it was proved in court that they were coursing, and the fine was about 350 quid each, which it normally is for that. But with kennelling costs, I think they paid collectively £18,000. Now, we would have borne the cost of the kennelling up until that change in legislation, but nevertheless, they got that. They got driving bans. They were banned from coming into Lincolnshire in the company of sight dogs for 5 years, I think it was. So significant change in the legislation, which has put a lot of people off from coming to Lincolnshire to commit this criminality. And when I started here, I think we were about 1,800 to 2,000 reported incidents of hair coursing, which usually is between September and March. So half a year, that was the level, and it's in the low hundreds now. And I can't give you a specific number because it's still the season for it, so it's still going on. But very, very low numbers by comparison. And I don't know whether you've seen the media reports, but Cambridge has had some particular challenges this year around this activity. And whilst we do cross-border working, it's clear Lincolnshire has got a very solid approach to reducing that kind of level of problem. So I think it has been a good result.
If I could just ask one slight follow-up. What I was specifically driving at on that point was not just the success on hair coursing, which is very laudable and something which the magistrate takes very seriously, but also the effect of the number of offences that have been recorded in addition to that. So what the levels of the driving, the criminal damage, may need to give the sort of statistics in a supplemental written answer. But if we could get some meat on the bones to those sorts of effectiveness, that would be helpful.
Helping part to that. So we've not got this year's, as the Commission says, but reductions overall, 21, 22 to 22, 23, 60.3% reduction in course of service with incidents around hair coursing, 55% reduction from 23 to 24. Last two seasons, 46 arrests, 29 vehicles seized, 15 behavioural orders issued, and 54 dogs seized. And I would reiterate the point around the dogs. That's really what hurts the hair courses, and has certainly decanted the problem from Lincolnshire as it was, to other parts of the country. It's a real success story.
It is a success story, and congratulations, but we're beginning to get in the weeds, and we've already talked about that in this meeting this morning. So we've got to be careful we don't get too operational. Okay, thank you.
That's fine, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so that completes our questioning, Commissioner. Well, thank you for your attendance this morning. Just before you go, I think during the debate around your financial challenges, you did say that you are having
further meetings with the policing minister
On Tuesday.
on Tuesday, and you feel fairly confident that you might be able to improve the situation. Did I get that?
I'm absolutely confident that I will be attending that meeting.
Well, you made your statement very clear, so thank you for that.
And to be really clear, I stand super ready to work with them. And if they help us, I will be championing saying this government has solved a problem that hasn't been solved in a long time. So by no means am I out to score political points. If they'd love to solve our problem, I will be championing well they've done it. So, you know, I just look forward to the day we can say that we've got a sustainable police service for Lincolnshire. That's all I'm interested in.
And so are we, and we wish you both the best in your discussions with the police.
Thank you.
Thank you. He did say that, yeah, I certainly did not. John the leg wall. Chair, would you forgive me? I have a funeral to attend with, Mr. Talbot.
Yes.
Two, and I'm not allowed to be late. Carry on. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
When we got in.
Okay, we'll now move to item 9 on the agenda, the complaints position statement. First, over to you.
That was a big build up for me to say again. I think what to do is probably.
Okay, thank you. You will be aware, of course, that when it's on the agenda, you'll have seen that we will be discussing a review of the current arrangements later in the meeting. But thank you for your attendance.
Always stand ready to help you.
Okay, well, that's kind of it. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we've been going for 2 hours. I'm going to call for a 10-minute break. Thank you. Tell me when to stop.